Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Business Insights Hub. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be giving a few minutes for more people to come in. It's a little bit of a journey through the platform for people to enter the room, as I'm sure you know. So we'll be giving it just a few minutes before we get started. But very excited for today's discussion, which is really looking at how-tos within this fascinating food biotech landscape. Now, just a reminder that if you have questions or comments to put to the group and the speakers as we're going, please use the chat to do so. Or if you're feeling really brave, use the hand raise button and we will call on you to ask your questions out loud. Do put your cameras on. These sessions work the best if they're really interactive and we can all see one another. So we do encourage you to do that, but you've got a little bit of a break because we're going to start off with a few live presentations to start off with. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our moderator for today to take you through the discussion, introduce the speakers and take us through a bit of the conversation a little later. So Austin, Cloves, handing over to you.
Great, thank you so much, and glad to see people. I'm sure more will kind of continue to join, but we've got a really stellar roundtable today. Laura Clark from GFI, one of my former colleagues, and now past GFI in my personal career, but Laura's still there, really making great impact. José Luis Cabañero from Eatable Ventures in Spain, and then Jim Laird from Enough Foods as well. So really fantastic kind of group here, and excited to hear some presentations. So without further ado, I know people are still kind of joining, but perhaps in the interest of making sure that we have a little bit of time for discussion after presentations, Laura, if you would want to get started in your presentation, that'd be great.
Sure. So just need to get my slides up. Great. Okay, it's an honor to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Laura Clark, and I'm the Entrepreneurship Specialist for the Good Food Institute, or GFI. GFI is a nonprofit working internationally to build a sustainable, secure, and just food system with alternative proteins. Our goal is a world where alternative proteins are no longer alternative. For GFI, and for all the people joining this session to achieve our food tech objectives, we need lots of innovative companies to not just enter the space, but have access to the funds that allow them to move from bench to scale. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. These are remarkable times for food biotech. It's thrilling to see brilliant scientists working to solve some of the world's most intractable problems. These solutions, however, require serious capital infusion to come to fruition. And that's exactly what's happening in 2021. The CIO of S2G Ventures calls it a period of almost irrational exuberance. No one knows where funding in the sector will end up, but right now is a promising time. We're seeing more funds dedicated to food tech, like the one recently announced by Eatable Ventures. We're also beginning to see generalists enter the space. This is also promising. Next slide. Yet the reality is that raising money within biotech is hard. Bootstrapping is usually out of the question because of steep front-loaded cost. Unlike sectors like software, biotech is CapEx heavy, with steep R&D, development, and infrastructure needs. Plus, building the supply chain takes time. Large institutional investors may not be appropriate for early-stage companies, and there's often a hefty educational component to get investors up to speed on complex technologies. An additional consideration is that biotech founders are often focused on science rather than finance and business. Next slide. To navigate fundraising, it's important for companies to know the fundamentals. The first one being to be open to lots of avenues. Capital may come from different channels, both dilutive and non-dilutive. Examples are grants, which are non-dilutive but may require protracted application processes. University funds, also non-dilutive, may be another answer, but it's one that often requires founders to cede ownership of the IP. Angel investors, a dilutive option, may provide much needed funds in early stages, but may not be able to offer follow-on funding in future rounds. Venture capital, also dilutive, can offer strategic partnership as well as capital, but VC money could come with some loss of control. Friends and family, preferably non-dilutive, can lend a helping hand in the earliest stage, but likely won't be able to provide enough capital to scale. Private equity, dilutive, is likely not going to be a viable option until a company has reached growth stage. And debt financing, which might be appropriate for needs like equipment, carries extremely high risk. Of course, this list is not at all comprehensive. For instance, accelerators and incubators can be fantastic alternatives for food tech startups, with many providing not only capital, but also connections, office or laboratory space, and equipment. Next slide. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll focus on tips for earlier stage companies pursuing traditional channels. But regardless of what type of fundraising is involved, it's usually a long game that starts well before a round opens. During this time, founders need to talk to investors for guidance. One of my favorite related sayings is, if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. You just never know what's going to come out of a conversation. Founders must also assemble powerful teams with carefully timed strategic hires and a balance of human and intellectual capital. Equally important is the network, which should be stacked with investors, fellow entrepreneurs, industry leaders, scientists, talent, and attorneys. I know this can be hard for introverts, but it's necessary when positioning to raise. Make sure the company is constantly getting feedback from existing or potential customers to understand the market and refine the solution, and relentlessly collect, manage, and interpret data. Next slide. The data is important for many reasons, but it will play a critical role in the due diligence each interested investor will go through before funding a company. The company, however, has its own due diligence to do on each investor. Before contacting a potential funder, mine your network for warm introductions. Cold calls and emails are generally ineffective. Before meeting an investor, understand the connections and expertise the investor can bring beyond capital. The objective is to raise smart money. It's also vital to know the investment prioritization of each investor, whether they write checks large enough to meet your needs, and whether they're a generalist or focused on food biotech. If they're a generalist, you may need to take time to cover basics and present the negative externalities of the current food system. If the investor already lives in the space, companies can spend less time on broader education and more time on why their solution is differentiated from their competitors. It's also helpful to understand which investor might be able to offer bridge or follow-on funding. Next slide. When determining how much money to raise, companies need to realistically assess runway, and in doing so, plan for the inevitable unexpected expenses, delays, and challenges. At any stage of a business, the goal is really simple. Don't run out of cash. Make sure the ask is large enough to get to the near-term milestones before having to open another round. Going out for money is typically a huge project, taking an average of 3 to 4 months and 40 investor meetings. While that's not always the case, it's best to prepare for it. You don't want to be fundraising 24/7. When companies land investment, if it's dilutive, the founders need to think about the implications for themselves, any vested employees, and existing and former investors. A note on the cap table here. Investors do not like messy ones. If a company's cap table is overly complicated by the inclusion of friends and family, part-time founders, inactive founders, or strategic advisors, it can be off-putting. It's much harder to clean up a messy cap table than to keep it clean in the first place. The fundraising process will likely require an executive summary and a pitch deck. Next slide. The exec summary should be no more than 1 to 2 pages and provide a compelling snapshot of the opportunity. I'm going to go into a little more detail about pitch decks here. In addition to my role with GFI, I've been an entrepreneur in residence for Georgetown University for 4.5 years. So I've seen hundreds of pitch decks and can say that even the strongest companies miss the basics at times. One of the most common errors I see are overly dense decks. Pitches should be streamlined, concise, and easy to follow. Use large fonts, short sentences, and great graphics. Beautiful.ai is a helpful resource for designing decks. I highly recommend it. Good decks tell a relatable story in 10 to 20 slides. Fewer is better. Next slide. Food biotech companies frequently tend to create decks that are heavily weighted on technology and light on de-risking the investment. Yes, the presentation has to include the tech and its impact, but it's imperative to demonstrate the probability of financial success. In addition to outlining the problem and the tech that solves it, the deck should include the total addressable market, or TAM. It's even better to also identify the serviceable addressable market, SAM, and serviceable obtainable market, SOM. Show a clear competitive advantage, highlight any traction, even if it's modest or early. Show product market fit. This is where the customer feedback data is invaluable. State the go-to-market strategy, including whether the audience will be B2B, B2C, or both. Provide robust financial detail. Depending on the solution and stage, it may be possible to share unit economics, customer acquisition cost, cost of goods sold, margin, etc. Be as transparent as possible when discussing the business and financial modeling. Suggest valuation and terms if needed, and be prepared to negotiate both. The reason I said if needed is that some financing instruments change the timing of valuation. Before the round, companies should become well-versed in financing options, which may include equity, a convertible note, a safe note, or another vehicle. Outline allocation of funds in detail, and have a strong team and advisor slide that gives the investor confidence that the expertise fits the challenge. The projections in the deck are going to be somewhat of a guess, especially with Food Tech Ventures. It needs to be an educated guess based on significant research and data, but no one expects a pitch deck to get every forecast right. Businesses evolve and projections are ever changing as a company scales. That's okay. Get as close to a defensible and highly de-risked path to ROI as possible. The final tips, next slide please, are simple ones that can trip up even the most promising founders and companies. First and foremost, investors look at the founders as much as the solution. They want to work with someone who listens, communicates often, is willing to learn and adapt, and makes it pleasant to get through the journey of building the company. It isn't necessary to be obsequious, but a combination of being confident and humble can be persuasive. Move quickly once an investor says yes. Time kills deals. Prioritize everything related to the raise. If the investor says no, accept it amicably and keep the relationship intact by touching base occasionally, even if it's just to send company updates. Regardless of the outcome, founders should not get discouraged. Every disappointing response is a learning opportunity. Just because an investor doesn't back a venture initially, it doesn't mean the investor won't join a later round. It also doesn't mean they won't introduce the company as someone who is a better fit. Fundraising is typically an exciting, exhausting, and unpredictable process for companies at any stage, but the war stories can become part of the eventual success story. Next slide. At GFI, we offer open access research as well as useful databases and directories for companies before, during, and after a raise. Visit gfi.org to take advantage of many of these, including our company database, investor directory, and GF Ideas community. Next slide. I welcome the opportunity to connect with any of you via email or LinkedIn. Thank you.
Wonderful. Laura, thank you so much for that presentation. I think that was great to provide an intelligent and informed approach to a very daunting process for many people. Fundraising is notoriously difficult for everyone and lengthy, and can feel sometimes like like you are fundraising 24/7. But I think that was a great mix of specific tailored guidance as well as some helpful kind of mindset adjustments. So really appreciate that and look forward to kind of discussing a little bit later in greater detail. So for those who have joined fairly recently, just a quick kind of refresher, we're going through a quick series of presentations, and we'll have a little bit of time for discussion at the end. Feel free to drop questions in the chat in the meantime, and I can always bring those up later. But in the meantime, Jose, over to you for your presentation.
Yep, thank you. 1 second while I share my screen. Okay, here we go. Good. So thanks for having us. It's a great pleasure. I'm going to be talking about what to do while you wait for the market to happen. Basically, we work a lot on a concept that is technology readiness. We normally use the TRL scale for all the startups we work with. Some of you or many of you will know about it, and it's initially originated at NASA, and European Union also adopted it as a measurement to select the technologies in their processes. A little bit about Eatable Adventures in a couple of slides. We are active since 2015. Initially, we created a community of entrepreneurs that is aggregated across our social premises, food entrepreneurs and gastroentrepreneurs in Spanish, that is right now gathering over 25,000 founders and is delivering over 1,500 projects in 2020. This community is basically enabling us to have a solid understanding of the startup ecosystem. We gather all these companies into a qualified database and CRM system that right now hosts over 8,000 startups in the food and beverage segment and in the food tech segment. We also have a second activity line that is a corporate work. We are working with over 20 food companies in 3 continents at the moment, and we're helping them to define their open innovation, corporate venturing strategies, and also how to face technology and how to adopt technology into their food creation operations. We run over 8 incubation and acceleration programs located in Spain, 7 of them located in Madrid, 1 located in Barcelona. And finally, we recently launched Eatable Evolution Fund that is a 50 million vehicle that is targeted to cross the seed to Series A path and to help companies evolve and grow in this market. Our base is to work in this circle. So we connect the startups with corporates, and we connect them with investment and different investor vehicles. So we think that this virtuous circles will allow this ecosystem to grow significantly in the future. Our team, we are over 25 people at the moment, and basically we are dedicated to help startups to progress in this market. I'm going to jump all these because I think that I put more slides I wanted to put. So we are basically working on a technology approach, and we have identified 11 technology platforms that we believe are going to transform the market, and they will be allowing the food system to evolve, be more sustainable, more kind to the environment, and create a better food future for everyone. Some of these platforms are what we call pervasive, like artificial intelligence. You can find out artificial intelligence all across the value chain, from agricultural landscapes to consumer food service, for example. Some others like fermentation, or similarly, they are present across all the value chain in different forms and different applications, but the basic technology is applicable to the complete value chain. Other areas like bioprinting, we are super excited. We believe it's going to be a fundamental change into the way that we consume proteins. And in general, all these platforms will allow us to have a better evolution into this market. So what to do when you are starting, how we move from early stage technology to mass market. Every single startup, every single person involved in this industry is super excited about changing the food systems end to end, about moving into the future with a more sustainable footprint. Most of that get a lot of frustration every day when we talk about what we do. We explain our propositions to the market, and clients, investors, or consumers do not really grasp the evolution that we are trying to bring to the market. Given the presence that I mentioned before, and the number of decks that we receive on a daily basis, I have received like 9 in 2 hours today. And then the team effort to analyze and discuss with founders, we have identified the biggest shortcomings that biotech companies and food tech companies suffer when they try to reach the market. And this is a very traditional schema. And the first one is basically this: is adoption or innovation takes time to get adopted by the market. This is something that when we meet with corporations and they try to get food tech very quickly, they're trying to get plant-based products to the market, they normally expect the same return they're having with the traditional products in a very, very short time frame, similar to the time frame that takes them to increase revenue with a product portfolio improvement. The main activity that we undertake with specifically investors and corporations is basically to let them understand and to explain them that when you talk with early stage innovation, materializing that innovation, getting it to market, it takes a lot of time. We have evaluated that a new technology takes not less than 5 years to hit consumers. So that means that it is natural that the market is late. The market seems to be far away, seems to be moving a year after year. But the reality is that we need to have the right resources, the right approach, and take the right steps. And this is what we're going to be discussing today. Second one is that scalability takes time as well. Scalability is very complex, moving from a tabletop bioreactor to delivering tons of proteins. It really takes a lot of effort. It means that we need to move on several steps. We need to plan how we scale this technology production, how we address the market, and how we basically get embedded into the industry, so that our product at the end is a product that the industry will adopt like on a natural form, and will be part of any consumer offering. Integration with the value chain. Oh, sorry, I got this in Spanish. Sorry. Integration with the current value chain is also very important. Integration with the industry is super relevant. The industry has very well established metrics, very well established processes, and the reality is that any startup needs to basically adapt themselves to become part of the industry that they want to disrupt and the industry they want to change. But it's super important to basically be adapted to this industry. When we go to this to the industry, it is very important to have unit economics that are meaningful. Many innovations in these tabletop trials, in these early pilot trials, the price per ton is normally super expensive for food. Food is normally using very low price points. So getting the right economics, getting the right price point is going to be very difficult until we get the scale. So in the meantime, our recommendation is always to look for parallel market, like pharma or cosmetics that are using many ingredients that are common to the food industry, and they support better and a more expensive price per unit. So getting the best initial market and understanding that your final goal is food, but in the meantime, you can do things in other industries to get the scale, to get production moving forward is for us very important. You also need to understand that incumbents need to preserve a status quo. Large corporations they are designed to maintain revenue, they are designed to expand market value, and they are designed to preserve a course that is very difficult to change. So any new product that is coming to market, any innovation is normally something that they will, at least initially, they will try to contain, and they will try to keep aside for a while until they realize that this is something that consumers are looking for. This is something that is good for their own portfolio products. And at that moment, they become very eager to get into these all innovations and adopt them and include them into their food matrices, into their production systems. Regulation that in many of the conversations we have with entrepreneurs is something that is always there. It looks like a burden. It looks like it's very difficult to overcome this lack of regulation in many cases, like cellular agriculture, for example. Regulation is certainly necessary. Food has a safety and health safety aspect, and it is very important that we work with the regulators and we lobby with the regulators to start getting information to them, to understand the complexity of the solution we are putting on the table, to understand what we need to do in order to validate the safety of this solution, and then develop the steps that will take us to full market adoption. And then finally, consumer and public opinion does matter. So when we talk about lab food or biosynthetic food or cellular food or something like that, how consumers react to this. In many of our experiences and in many of the occasions that we have confronted consumers with actual engineered products, many of them, they react very negatively. So we need to start working to get consumers understanding that this is the future of food. This is something that is going to be the common denominator in the future. And this is the way that we need to evolve our food system in order to provide better food for more people in our planet. We also need to work on the concept of natural. So what is a natural product? So many products are created in a natural way, but because they are substituting an animal, they are not considered a natural product. So we need to work all these concepts in order to get consumers adoption much faster. Then we don't need to be biased by consumer research. Consumers want to eat healthier, but the reality is that they won't pay an extra for healthy food. That's something that when we talk with corporations, it's in all the conversations. Every consumer says that they want to eat healthier, they will pay more for food. The reality is that it's not going to happen. So we actually need to find out the right market, the right consumer that will actually pay an extra for a better food. Or the other approach is, can we feed more people with the same resources? The reality is that the industry will try to keep prices as high as they can. So all these elements, we need to consider them. We need to put the right messaging, and we need to develop that messaging with press, with all the actors that will help us promote our product or solution. And we always work on the concept of product market fit. Many market claims ask for a brilliant future, a great market for a certain type of products. Then the reality is that we can find out many of these reports that they lack the proper background to be meaningful and to represent a solid view of the market. Our recommendations to end up are basically six of them. The first one is to mind the time frame of your development will take to reach the market, to reach market fit. This is super important. We can be in the early adopters mode, but we all want the large majority adoption. So this is what we need to develop, and this is what we need to look for. Traditional market talent, traditional executives that have been working in the industry, they always are very valuable to help us adapt our messaging, our wording to the reality of the market, to translate our commercial go-to-market model into one that will fit with the industry. And we always need to look for alternative growth models. As I said before, what do we really need to build up a factory? Can we do it in a different way? Can we license instead of going to market directly? So can we do business to business instead of business to consumer? Look for alternative market segments like pharma, medical, pet nutrition, or cosmetics. Those normally are markets that offer very good units for the initial productions, and they help us to develop an industry, and they help us to reach consumers and to establish the company processes while the consumer food market is happening. Partner with incumbents. All the corporations need innovation. They are all looking for innovation, and this trend is growing and is getting more important day by day. So partnering with them, don't be afraid of them, and try to establish the right product to work with corporations. This is part of our day-to-day work. This is one of the most important recommendations we can give you. Conduct market trials and technical research. So help and liaise with companies and research institutes that can help us develop the right information to gain consumers and to gain regulators and speed up the market. And finally, get control on your company evolution. In this novel foods space and biotech space, this means lobby. Talk to people, get known, and spread the word about how we need to evolve and change the food market. That's it. Thank you.
Wonderful, Jose. That was really fantastic. And I think a great compliment to Laura's presentation as well. So with some real specific considerations for Food Biotech. So in the interest of time, how about Jim, over to you for some of the challenges and successes that you've seen delivering here.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Laird. I'm the CEO of Enough, and I'm absolutely delighted to be part of Food Biotech 21. So thank you to LSX, I apologize, for inviting me to such a strong panel. Enough's goal is to produce or to grow 1 million tons of sustainable protein within the 10 first years from our first production. So in that context, I hope we address Jose Luis' ambition or requirement of a large market. We're in a very large market of the food protein market. We address sustainability by achieving high scale and using less resources than other protein options. And most importantly, in this sector, we'll only do so if we can help make delicious vegan foods that consumers love. If I can ask the next slide, please. I'm also particularly delighted or pleased to join this panel during the week of COP26, as it amplifies the role of food and agriculture and its impact on the planet, and also the need for a protein transition. And whilst the main COP26 agenda was relatively silent on the role of food and agriculture, I really celebrate the voluntary pledge, which commits countries to reducing methane emissions by 30%, and indeed methane reductions, not carbon cuts, could well be the COP's legacy. Livestock accounts for about 30% of methane, which is coincidentally exactly the same as that from transport and fuel. So if the world is genuine about this pledge, then maybe the protein mix is destined to change quite rapidly. Now, it's intriguing to me that within the timescale of 2030, and I highlight it, it's 3,000 days away, the forecast from most experts is that animal proteins don't decline, but indeed continue to grow at somewhere close to 2% or by more than 20% relative to today. And I struggle to see how globally we meet the methane pledge if that's true, because if even the complete removal of fossil fuel or the complete removal of livestock will not achieve that 30% aim. But I do admire the ambition in the pledge and celebrate the positivity in that transition that this may enable. If I can move on one slide, please. If we look at the size of the protein market based on the report from BCG, Blue Horizon from earlier in the year, it predicts demand for alternative protein will grow at 17% per year, equivalent to 440% growth between now and 2030, or an increase of 50 million tons. Now, that report estimates that 70% of the additional 50 million comes from plant-based options, primarily soya, and the balance, 30% or 15 million tons, comes from fermentation. So as a food tech company that grows most sustainable source of protein using fermentation, we champion the latter. And our goal of 1 million tons within 10 years means installing the capacity for about 200,000 tons by the end of the decade. It's startling that that only accounts for 1.3% of the market described by BCG, which either means that others will fill the gap, or in the terms of the investment world, there is a vast unmet need. I'm not downhearted by the small figure that we are targeting. In the short term, in the next 3 to 5 years, Enough's plans will account for about 10% of the market. And as one of the earlier movers in the sector, we'll always have scope to increase the level of our ambition. And if I can go forward again, please. So to give context of what we do, we convert locally grown fermentable sugars as our input into mycoprotein in a very efficient manner. We use very large scale fermentation, converting the sugar into whole biomass, which contains fiber and protein. And this has applications in a wide range of foods. And we do it with IP, which creates a zero waste process. If I can see the next slide, it shows Abunda in its raw state. And what you see top right is Abunda, our mycoprotein. It looks a bit like bread dough. It's or bread dough or a chicken mince. And its advantage relative to the full range of other protein options in terms of sustainability and its efficient use of land and water and low CO2 emissions. And then nutritionally, it also contains both protein and fiber. And importantly, it contains all the essential amino acids and is versatile in application. Our efficiency starts from the fundamentals of biotech, where using small organisms, we grow protein more efficiently than the larger organisms, such as the chicken, the pig, or the cow. And in terms of sustainability metrics, Abunda will use less than 90% of the water, or less than 90% of the land, and will emit less than 95% of the emissions relative to animal sources of protein. Moving to the next slide, please. We are currently in the process of building what I believe, and which I am yet to be disproven on, is the largest new protein factory to be built anywhere in the world so far this decade. And to do so, and we do so having raised a 50 million Series B earlier this year. We also do so with support from the Bio-Based Industries Joint Undertaking, who supported this as one of their flagship projects. So we're building a facility with a footprint of over 50,000 tons. It will be operational by this time next year. And for anyone in the US, this will make over 100 million pounds per year of protein. I couldn't avoid using the temptation of moving it into hundreds of millions of pounds. And this dwarfs the scale of some of the new facilities being introduced for pea protein, or indeed for cultivated meat. Maybe to put it into a more consumer context, in the facility shown here, we'll produce the equivalent of 6 or 7 cows worth of meat every hour. And at full scale, this increases to 30 cows per hour or 250,000 cows per year. To add further detail, we're building in Zeeland in the south of the Netherlands, where we co-locate on a facility owned by Cargill, where we derive some synergy by taking a starch source from a Cargill starch plant, feeding it into our plant, and then any of the waste we derive further efficiencies by co-location. Next slide, please. So for enough, the principle of scale is crucially important because it's only with scale that we make impact, and the core impact is in terms of realizing the aims of sustainable protein transition, reducing water use, carbon emissions, and supporting the switch away from animal protein, which aligns strongly with current consumer trends. And there's many factors which impact on this change, and we're very crucially, we'll only achieve this by aligning with consumer needs, and really that is aligning on their needs on price, on taste, and on availability. And so the next slide, I'll talk about price. In terms of price, efficiency at scale clearly correlates with cost, and we only believe you can make an impact on sustainability by making something which is affordable to the mass market. So our price positioning is to be disruptively competitive relative to chicken, which generally is a price at an industrial scale of 3 to 3.5 euros, and is notably cheaper than red meat options, which would be double the price here. In terms of our price positioning, we will enable on shelf via partners, and we're a B2B model. We are already at achieving price parity or better relative to animal proteins. And the next slide, moving on to taste and consumer acceptance. Mycoprotein is neutral in taste and has long established consumer acceptance and preference. And the versatility of Abunda is what excites me, as we've seen some amazing products made by both our in-house development team and also by prospective customers. In terms of availability, our business model and route to market is as B2B ingredient. And we believe this gives us the biggest and fastest path to scale. Commercially, we've got some high levels of customer interest and offtake commitments secured for about 80% of our initial capacity. That's under option, and we will move into binding contracts in the coming months. And there's announcements released from companies including Unilever, Marks and Spencers, and others. And we are in the process of confirming those first binding offtake agreements. To José Luis' point, we've also had the benefit of a regulatory pathway, which relative to some of other options is more straightforward, given the existing approvals under EFSA and the US FDA. And to my last slide. Finally, although our plan starts with the facility in the Netherlands, and we are madly excited by it, we are wholly aware that this is a genuinely global market, and as such, our plans will extend to other geographies. I think there's no market to be in right now which is more exciting than the need for sustainable protein or faster growing, and we're convinced that fermentation is the right solution for that. We will only achieve the required proteins transition by working collaboratively, and to meet the market need of 50 million tons of new animal sources of protein, that's an annual figure, by 2030. We will need collectively the combination of investors, innovation, more bioreactors, and more marketeers. And wherever you are sitting within that community, enough welcomes the opportunity to work with you. So thank you to LSX for the opportunity and to all attending today. I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jim. That was really insightful to see, and I'm beyond excited to go visit that plant one day once it's up and fully operational, and appreciate the conversion into pounds as well for my American brain. As I mentioned earlier in the chat, those attending, feel free to drop comments in, or you can raise your hand and we can simply unmute you. And I would also invite panelists to chat with one another. If you have specific questions, maybe just raise your hand or come off mute and interrupt. But I'm really curious, Jim, just because it's kind of top of mind for me. I would love to hear, I mean, Laura talked earlier about the importance of really kind of building partnerships with funders in the first place, not just looking at them as a source of potential kind of revenue, but in the VC space in particular, building longer relationships and kind of partnerships. And Jose talked around this as well, the need to do that. I'm curious, Jim, about I would love to hear some of your experience, how you kind of generated so much buy-in, not just from your direct investors, but also from, your kind of collaborators in the process that, signed offtake agreements and things like that. seem to be really critical to the success that you're seeing.
Yeah, I think I'd have to say we made a lot of mistakes, and we didn't do it all right. If I was giving the answer, I think I would, with my learned answer, I think being absolutely clear on your purpose and staying true to it is massively important in terms of credibility, or in terms of tenacity as an entrepreneur, and helping you overcome the obstacles, but also in terms of your consistency of message to your external community. So I think we could along the journey have looked for change strategy, go for higher value add or higher price ingredients, but I think it would have changed our story. And so being clear on what our role is was fundamental to that. I think equally, having some successes is what, anybody likes a few successes. We are allowed a few failures as well, but having some milestones that you can communicate to your stakeholders and which are realistic and you can therefore get past, that was very much part of our journey. And maybe the third part of that, minimum viable is something which I hear some people saying you can't embrace the minimum viable concept in food tech because food needs to be safe, and food does need to be safe. But actually, I do embrace minimum viable, certainly for that early stage of where we're at, and so making the choices that ensure you get representative product on somebody's plate, and also embrace the fact that you achieve your milestones by being fairly brutal with your aims and getting going. I think that's been important to us for maintaining support from some really fantastic investors, and maybe come back on some of the investor mix, and maybe in a different question.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura and Jose, feel free to kind of chime in. I'm curious about your opinions on Jim's last point of, that odd split of looking forward at potential regulatory barriers that Jim thankfully seems like less of an issue potentially with some of Abunda generally, but Laura and Jose, I know that you work with a lot of different companies where that's a real big consideration, and there's a big kind of split between how you proceed in those early stages of financing.
I think Jim might be trying to answer. Jim, you might be on mute.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was to Laura. Was that to me again?
I would love to hear kind of anyone's thought, but I pitched it initially to Laura and Jose, but Jim would love to hear your.
Oh, Jim, I'm sorry, I misspoke there. So sorry. No, I'll be happy to just chime in and say I completely agree with Jim in terms of minimum viable, because this is something that is overlooked too frequently, and it trips up companies because they don't really have product market fit. They haven't really refined it. And therefore, when they go out to actually launch, then they may not understand whether or not their product is actually going to be able to succeed at all. And so without that minimum viable, I think you're kind of lost. So I would say move heaven and earth to make sure you can come out with something that gives you a little bit of a foundation before you go all in.
So we have faced situations where we have invested in companies with the promise that regulation will not be an issue, especially in the mycelium space, because the strains were already approved in another applications, food applications, and the reality is that you need to be super focus on getting the right approvals and validating the right approvals. It's not always straightforward. From an investment standpoint, in the very early stages of a fund, like where we are now, it's not really an issue because we have 10 years to go. So it's something that we believe is going to be moving faster. But if you're investing in the late stage of your fund, it's certainly an issue, and you need to be very careful about the regulation status.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's something that going back to Laura's initial point towards entrepreneurs, that maybe they should be cognizant of, with specifically who they're targeting, which investors they're really connecting with, where within the life cycle of the fund that investor is currently sitting. I think would be important. Angela typed in a kind of vague question just about how to protect IP, and Jim, I know that you all have very specific IP that's kind of a big value add for you. That zero waste process is really important. I would love to hear maybe your initial just experiences with how you kind of developed and then worked on protecting your IP in such a fast-moving space.
Yeah, I think IP is something which is valuable as you go through each of those funding rounds, and therefore it's a bit like tax, that our strategy on advisors has been to try and secure somebody that will be there for you in 3 years' time, 5 years' time. And whilst we acknowledge it as a big cost, and IP is a big cost, it is such a big value item in your funding process that you need to be able to lean on it very heavily and know that it's robust, and that your investor DD will not find the flaws in it. So I think we absolutely, one of my chairman said to me many years ago that it's when you first file that patent, you have to accept it's £1 million ticket that you're filing by the time you've fully defended it in multiple territories. And if you don't end up defending it in multiple territories, it probably means there wasn't the value in it in the first place. So I think we go into it knowing that your core IP is going to be expensive, but actually, if it's worth defending, defend it hard and secure it well, and therefore use advisors that can help you navigate that landscape. And I think we've had some other IP where we may have used it for tactical purposes, but and it's just recognizing that by the time you've gone through national into multiple nations, then your IP costs become quite big. So but it is for a business like ours, having some IP in the basket or in the pitch deck, I think is undoubtedly an important asset. Yeah, I could not agree more. And I know we only have a few more minutes left. I'll take us to 50. We're slightly over, but I don't think the next panel starts until the top of the hour. So, I mean, Laura and Jose, I'm really curious about your opinions on this. Laura, in particular, given that you have so much experience in other industries as well, maybe specific things you've seen in food biotech.
I'll speak just to, as it relates to protecting your IP during your raise. This is a art form, because depending on who you're talking to, you may be able to require an NDA, but when you get to like the VC level, they're not typically going to sign an NDA. Their entire reputations are based on whether or not they can keep their mouth shut. So you have to trust that. If you don't, then you're with the wrong partner. So I would say that you need to be prepared to talk about your IP and your idea in a way that doesn't make you terribly nervous, because you're going to have to probably go out and pitch to lots of people. So don't give away everything. I think you have to find a way to articulate what you're doing and the value of your proposition without going into too much detail until you've gotten very embedded with an investor, which at that point you should have a relationship where you're not concerned about any kind of betrayal on the IP end. I do think that at some point you have to go ahead and share everything, but use common sense, be careful, and don't expect VCs to sign NDAs.
Sure, wise words. Jim, go ahead.
Also, I'll just try and maybe put one point back there. I agree with that. And I also think that one of the things we learned was in our early days, we talked about our process, which was a bit that we had IP on, and we didn't disclose IP, but we talked about our process and our tech. And actually the thing that our customers are that's not what our customers are going to buy. Our customers are going to buy the product that enables. And I think we've matured into recognizing that whilst we might be fascinated by our tech, our customers are fascinated by the product that it makes ultimately. And I think we've stopped talking about our tech quite so much.
Well said, Jim.
Yeah, that's a great point. The art of communicating around your IP to different audiences, I think, is something that you hone over time. So fantastic. Jose, I just want to give you a chance. Any final kind of notes on IP before we close things up? I realized I didn't give you a chance.
Well, basically, one of the things we're doing is to reinforce IP documentation, and that's something that is super important. Molecular signatures is something that we are empowering all our startups to go for, and attach those molecular signatures to their patents. And it is great to have legal support. It's great to have all this protection. The reality is that the patent can be cited very easily. So we basically encourage all the startups that we work with to develop this proof of evidence that the method is unique, and attach it to the patent regulation so that they can reinforce if they need to dispute it in the future.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, look, I know we're at time, we're a little past time technically, but I think still within the acceptable window for the conference. So first, just thank you so much to all of our panelists. Really appreciate you spending a bit of your time today with us. And then Angela, back to you for kind of conference details.
Yes, I will echo that. Thanks for those wonderful presentations, and Austin for the great discussion at the end. I personally found that really useful and interesting. So thank you very much. I hope all of you watching did as well. Thanks for joining us. Do stick around. We have our US Investor Insights panel coming up. Some really great speakers. So do make sure you listen in. A lot of really valuable expertise and knowledge coming out of the US. So do stick around for that. But in the meantime, thank you once again to all of our speakers and Austin, and goodbye.